Volkswagen T-Cross. It's the most affordable SUV from Volkswagen, and it's a bit like a Volkswagen Polo if it was wearing a pair of hiking boots to make itself a little taller. And at just over $35,000 drive away, it still comes with a flip key. So together, let's poke and prod at this thing, check out all of its features and take it for a drive to figure out if it's actually worth buying. Now, do you want to know what it's like to own a Volkswagen T-Cross? Well, go to productreview.com.au because there you can read reviews from owners who've actually bought and lived with this car. But if you want to leave a review of your own car, you can do that there as well. But first, what sort of engine does a base model small SUV from Volkswagen get? Well, it gets a 1-litre 3-cylinder turbocharged petrol motor, which produces 85 kilowatts, which isn't a huge amount of power, but you get a decent amount of torque. You get 200 newton meters of torque under here. Now here's the thing, the tar weight of the Volkswagen T-Cross is around 1200 kilos, which is pretty light, so you don't need a whole bunch of power to go at a reasonable speed. Now the acceleration figure on this car is 10.2 seconds from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour. Now to service this thing, it's going to cost you either $1,400 for 3 years or $2,450 for 5 years. And the servicing intervals for this car is every 12 months or every 15,000 kilometers. So let's see what else you get when you spend around $35,000 on a car like this. Well, you're getting halogen lights, not LEDs. Your LEDs are just your daytime running lights down below. You're getting some chrome and a more rugged exterior compared to something like a Volkswagen Polo. Now you're getting 16-inch alloy wheels, which look quite nice, and they also have some pretty nice looking Volkswagen studs on them as well. These are wrapped in a city tire, which is a more budget-friendly tire, and you've also got disc brakes on the front and the back. Now along the side you do get roof rails, but you don't get keyless entry. Instead, you have to take the key out of your pocket to do that, but you do have central locking. But something that is very important to note about the T-Cross is that the construction of this thing is very solid, so it's got a very nice door feel. So even though it's a base model, it doesn't really feel like a base model when you open and close the doors. Now, one of the biggest benefits of buying this instead of a Polo is that you get extra ground clearance. So this thing has 185 millimeters of ground clearance, where the Polo only has 165 millimeters of ground clearance. So it's just a little bit better for going up steep driveways, and that's thanks to also having short front and rear overhangs. But unfortunately, since this is a turbocharged 3-cylinder motor, the minimum fuel requirement is 95 RON here in Australia, which is slightly more expensive than just being able to put the cheapest fuel inside this car. Now at the back you get a small boot lip spoiler. I really like the boxy look of this small little SUV. You get a reflector strip across the back, a tiny rear wiper, a sticker to let everyone know this has a 5-year unlimited kilometer warranty, a T-Cross badge, and some nice short bumpers, which of course, like I mentioned, helps with approach and departure angles of very aggressive urban terrain. Now it is a base model, so this does have a manual tailgate, and as you can see here, I have a lot of bags here to demonstrate what it would be like to go on a light road trip, which is automatically going to eat up your 455 liters of boot space. But it's a nice tall space, so you can stack your bags up. You do have seats that fold in a 60-40 split, but you don't have Volkswagen's iconic ski pass-through, unfortunately, so you're going to have to make do with sacrificing seat space for more boot space. Now, if you do fold all those seats down and you remove this hard cover that comes with the car, you'll get 1,281 liters of total boot space. But if you tick the sound and vision package, which gives you a Beats audio sound system, that will eat up 80 liters of your boot space thanks to an included subwoofer. But at least under here, still getting a spare tire. And then of course, I like how solid the boot feels. Even when you're pulling down on this plastic, there's no movement at all, and it shuts nice and solidly. Now jumping in the back here, you do have 2 USB Type-C ports, but there's no air vents. You do have large cubbies for some water bottles, and your windows in the back do get out all the way. Now I've also got some map pockets, and I have decent amounts of feet room, knee room, and headroom as a 5'11" adult, and I've also got some nice spongy headrests. Now the middle seat is going to be a bit rough because of that large transmission and exhaust tunnel in the middle, so you're better off carrying 4 adults comfortably, but you do have ISOFIX points if you need to carry any baby seats in the back. And to be honest, these rear seats feel a lot more comfortable than a Volkswagen Polo and less claustrophobic thanks to those larger rear windows. So even though this is a small SUV, I can easily see myself doing a long road trip sitting here in the back. Now up front, our car's been fitted with a sound and vision package, which will cost you over $2,000, and that will give you the speaker system upgrade, which is Beats audio. You've got a 10.25-inch digital instrument cluster, and of course it will also include wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, things that I would say would be absolutely worth it if you plan on owning this car for a long time. Up top we do have some scratchy plastic plastics, and you're going to find a lot of them in here, but you do have a nice little padded area to put some storage up here on the dashboard, which I like a lot. I like the pattern here on the dashboard as well. Even though it's a plastic, it just looks a bit more interesting. And then also we do have a glove box, but it's a bit shallow. Now you do have these washing machine style dials here, which some people actually prefer because they're a lot easier than having them in a touch screen, and I really like how physical they feel and tactile. You've also got two USB-C ports, which I use to charge my phone. You get a 12-volt socket, a nice robust shifter, which is also in a leather type material boot, so it doesn't feel too cheap. And you've also got this leather wrapped manual handbrake, but you do have these cup holders, which are a bit small. These seats are actually quite comfortable. They're well padded, and they're made of cloth, but they do look interesting. They are manually adjustable. The only thing that's find annoying with European cars, they like to use the dial to adjust the lean angle rather than a simple lever. I'm not too sure why, because the lever is so superior to the dial, and I always get complaints from people when they figure out they have to switch the dial multiple times just to get this thing to lean forwards and backwards. Now we do have this leather wrapped steering wheel, and this is what really made this thing feel a lot more premium than say like another base model, because just simply having a nice steering wheel makes me feel like I'm driving something a bit more expensive than something that has like a vinyl steering wheel or a plastic steering wheel. You've also got shifter paddles here, and I love the digital cockpit, and that's why I think it's worth the upgrade, because you get integrated maps in here and it just looks great, and something that makes this car feel a lot more expensive than it would if it didn't have it. And of course your steering wheel is adjustable telescopically, so it's really easy to get comfortable in this car. Now you might be going, well Cameron, 85 kilowatts doesn't sound like a lot of power. Well, we have a little thing called power to weight ratio, and that means that you don't need a whole bunch of power to move this amount of car. It's only 1200 kilograms, and so you actually just drift along pretty well, and then when you have to put your foot into it, that turbocharger comes alive and helps move you along at a reasonable pace. Now the acceleration time of 10.2 seconds from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour isn't so impressive, but you're not buying this car because it's meant to be rivaling the Golf R. You're buying this car because you're trying to look for a lifted, economical hatchback, which is exactly this. It does a really good job of doing just that. Now, you would normally expect some lazy steering, some very unrefined acoustics in here, and you might just feel like you've got an engine that's pulled out of a communist era Russian car. But instead, what we have here is a fairly engaging drive. And as anyone who's driven a Polo would know, that is actually pretty fun to drive as even a non-GTI variant. And we also got ourselves a very refined interior. Now, what is a highlight for me is holding onto this leather wrapped steering wheel. It just feels so much nicer, and then I would pay the extra $2,000 and a bit for the extra speaker system upgrade here, the Beats audio and the 10.25-inch digital instrument cluster. Now acceleration's not too bad either. I can knock this gearbox into a sport mode, which is pretty good, and it actually does something by shortening up those ratios and allows you to motor along at a reasonable pace, and you will get up to speed just fine. But if you load this car up with lots of people, lots of luggage, that's when it's going to feel maybe a tiny bit underpowered. But here, feels pretty good. Now this does have a torsion beam rear suspension setup, which means it's going to feel a little bit more playful than a larger SUV, and that's actually kind of fun. So it means cornering can actually be a bit more enjoyable in this lifted small hatchback. And I love the visibility out of this thing. We have blind spot monitoring, which is good, so we're going to be able to just check our blind spots pretty easy. This thing does have a reversing camera, and there is someone passing on the other side of the road. That was awesome. And then you can react quickly. So if someone is coming into your lane ahead of you, you can just have a twitch of the steering wheel and you feel like this car reacts pretty well. So that's something that was really surprising to me. And I just feel like this is a pretty refined driving experience for the money. And even if you have to clear a little bit of dirt like I'm doing now, you can sort of be a bit more confident because you don't have to worry so much about the ground clearance in this thing, thanks to the extra little bit of ground clearance it gets over, say, a standard Polo. Now, here are the things that are a little bit annoying. The parking sensors are just overly sensitive. So if you go into a small dip, yeah, that's when it just goes, oh my gosh, you're about to hit something when you're not really. So if you're going down a steep driveway or a steep bit of road and you're entering onto another road, that's when you're going to find it to be a little bit overactive. Now, I've heard some people complain about the connection for wireless Apple CarPlay in this thing. I've actually found it to be pretty good and seamless. So I haven't had an issue with my iPhone here, but maybe some other people have encountered an issue. But to be honest, with my experience, it's been flawless. Now, braking this is nice and smooth, although this is pretty light, so you don't need a whole bunch of braking feel to get this thing to really just hook up. And then also, that brings me on to the gearbox. So it's a 7-speed dual clutch transmission, and this thing is fine day to day, but what happens is that at low speeds, sometimes it can take a little bit longer to engage and can feel a bit laggy and a bit grumbly at low speeds. So it's the typical dual clutch problems that this has had for a while, where it just doesn't feel as smooth as a torque converter. But once you're at speed, that's when it's really quite good. It's really good at snapping between gears, and it's really reactive. But what I did find is that if I put this thing to drive on a hill, I did find it roll back just a little bit more than a traditional torque converter automatic. And there is a bit of gearbox whine coming from here as well, which is something that really not my favorite, but it's not too noticeable, especially if you're talking to someone or if you have any sort of audio playing in here. Now, you don't have radar cruise control. We just have a standard cruise control setup, but we do have active lane keep assist, which is very good. And I did find the aircon to be working pretty well in a hot environment, and I've had this thing on an extremely hot day, and it did a really good job of keeping me cool on the inside, even though we have these basic climate controls. But here's the thing, I just think this is all the car most people need. It's got a responsive gearbox, it's got a pretty decent motor that's fuel efficient, which is nice, but it also has plenty of pull, so you feel like you've got enough power to be accelerating above the speed limit if you have to, but this will get you up to the speed limit just fine, and you can perform overtakes if you need to. It's nice to have the option of flappy paddle gearboxes if you want, so you do have those flappy paddles here on this leather wrap steering wheel. These seats are very comfortable, but yes, I do say for this to be the perfect all-rounder car, you do have to tick that sound and vision package to get the upgraded speakers and also that instrument cluster in front of me as well, which just feels a little bit more premium and really adds to the experience, I would say. So not having those would make me feel like I'm in more of a base model than I would be now, but I gotta say it's pretty good. Now, I would like to see like a sunroof option in this car. That'd be kind of fun to sort of bring a bit more light in here, but it's not entirely necessary. And as some of us know, having a sunroof in your car can be a good way to introduce leaks later in the life cycle of your car. Now, there is a small update coming to this car next year. It's getting a bit of a facelift, but if you don't have time to wait for that, then I would say jumping into one of these now is absolutely fine. But if you have time, you might want to wait for that to see if it's worth jumping into that, or maybe you could just jump into a demonstrator version of this once that new one is out. But I want to know, would you buy one of these? Let me know in the comments. And also, if you want to see more car content, follow us on Product Review Cars at Instagram and TikTok. Make sure you review your own car on productreview.com.au. My name's Cameron. I'll see you in the next one.